We all have uncomfortable feelings, but how we approach them is key. And certain spiritual approaches can be utterly transformative, but for many people, they can still fall a little short. And in this video, I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So, when it comes to uncomfortable feelings in the body, there are two approaches that some people talk about. There's the Vedantic and the tantric. So the Vedantic is about exploring the self on whose behalf the suffering is arising. So this is about leading into self-inquiry, and it can be extremely powerful. I remember having an argument or a disagreement with a friend a few years ago, and he said something that I found frustrating and somewhat irritating. And I did exactly this. I looked for the I, who was frustrated by this comment, couldn't find anyone or anything, and the irritation just collapsed like that. So this can be hugely powerful. But I would suggest it's the so-called tantric approach that tends to be more impactful for most people, in my view. And the tantric approach is about bringing our uncomfortable feelings as close as possible. Because when I speak to people, particularly clients, including people who have been on the spiritual path for decades, invariably there is a resistance to, or an avoidance, or a judgment towards uncomfortable feelings in the body. A sense of, I shouldn't be feeling this. And it is that resistance that is keeping the feeling in place and perpetuating the suffering. Or there might be a sense of, I want to accept this feeling with a subtle agenda to get rid of it. So this approach of really opening up to our uncomfortable feelings, bringing them so close, there's no distinction between us and them, this is hugely powerful. And this is where the recognition that our fundamental nature is awareness is so impactful and powerful, because the awareness that we truly are cannot be tarnished or harmed by any feeling that arises, no matter how painful or uncomfortable or big. And so if we're avoiding feelings of shame or guilt or grief, those can feel overwhelming. But when we're in touch with the part of us that is loving, aware presence, it becomes easier to turn towards these feelings, completely open to them, welcome and embrace them, realize they're arising in the space of awareness as awareness, and therefore they dissipate. The resistance, which comes from the mind, stops, and these feelings can unwind on their own. Now, this practice of turning towards our feelings is incredibly powerful. I remember when I was working in broadcasting, and I used to have feelings of anxiety arise in my stomach to the point where they nearly gave me panic attacks. And it was only by turning towards them and welcoming them with compassion and love that these feelings, they didn't go up into my head, they dissipated. They even went from a feeling of anxiety and fear to one of excitement. Similarly, when Alex and I got together, she had this really profound fear of flying, and she would go up into her head, very common avoidance technique. But I really encouraged her to go towards the feeling, to open up to it, to welcome it, to recognize that she was the awareness in which this feeling arose. And again, this fear of flying she had that was utterly debilitating just disintegrated and collapsed. So this is hugely, hugely powerful, and it's a fundamental first step. But I would argue there is another step, and that is to act in alignment with what our feelings want from us, because often our feelings are like messengers. Now, when we are children, we lay down these adaptive patterns to survive in our family of origin and at school or in society. And they are really helpful when we are young. But then if we don't realize we have these patterns in place, they take so much energy from us as we get older. And a classic one would be people pleasing. So if as a child, we learn that we have to put other people's needs before our own. perhaps a mother, a father figure, we learn this pattern that other people's needs are more important than ours. And so a survival pattern, an adaptive survival pattern would be to people please. If we open to the feelings associated with that and recognize that we are the awareness in which they arise, we might notice feelings of grief and sadness. And just to really tune into that can be hugely impactful and transformative. However, if we keep people pleasing and sacrificing our own needs for other people, then we are just perpetuating the suffering. We're perpetuating the pattern. We need to do something differently. And this is why if we come to our feelings, tune into our feelings, then ask the feelings, not necessarily as a question in the mind, but inquire, what does this feeling need from us? What is the loving action I can take on behalf of this feeling of grief or sadness? And then an action might come up. And an action could be saying no when we're more inclined to say yes. It could be putting a boundary down. It could be taking time for ourselves. And it's taking that loving action that's going to actually shift things, because that means we're moving into a new way of being. And the trap I see often is the ego is so sneaky. And I don't mean to judge it because it's a survival tool. But our ego will come up for a reason why we should continue to, for example, put other people's needs first. And we might say, oh, that's just the type of person I am. Well, that is a narrative that's not true. That's a form of avoiding the wisdom of our feelings. And so tuning in and asking, what is the loving action? And then crucially doing it, that is what's going to shift the dial. That is what's going to help us evolve in line with our loving nature. That is what helps us embrace a new way of being. Similarly, when it comes to things like honesty and integrity, sometimes it's easier, and our mind will come up with a reason why, to keep a secret to ourselves. Oh, we'll spare them. It's easier if they don't have to face what will be a difficult conversation. But that is also bypassing. We need to tune into our feelings, open to the wisdom that lies therein, and then act upon it. And being honest and acting with integrity are absolutely actions in line with our feelings, with our true feelings that are in line with our loving nature. So the spiritual approaches of tantric and Vedantic, welcoming our feelings, embracing them, so there's no distinction between us as our true nature of awareness and the vibration of the feeling itself within us, or investigating the I on whose behalf the suffering is arising, hugely powerful, no question about that. But if we're not then acting in alignment with the feelings, we still risk an element of bypassing. And that is not the way we're going to evolve in line with our loving nature. And this is a key distinction I think a lot of people miss. Now, this is a fundamental aspect of the coaching that I do. And as I said, the amount of people I speak to who've been on the spiritual path for decades and are still avoiding or denying or repressing or judging a feeling within their body and are not in tune with it and what it needs from them, it's a really, really common phenomenon. So the work I'm doing or helping people do, and that I do in my own life, is to help get in touch with the feelings and then take that loving action, because that is what shifts the dial. And if that speaks to you, and if that's something you'd like to explore with me, then you can book a free consultation via the link in the show notes. And I hope to see you there. Thank you for watching.